Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Amateur Experts Podcast, where we are experts of absolutely nothing. It's your host, Landon Oliver, here with my co host, Andrew Scott.
Yes, sir. And in tonight's episode, definitely an area where I'm not gonna pretend to be an expert. I love the NFL offseason. I love the NFL draft, but um, most of my draft research in the past either dealt with looking at possible guys the Rams could draft, who they apparently are no longer interested in doing for quite some time now, at least for the first round. And then kind of focusing on fantasy related guys. Like even before I played in a dynasty league, that was kind of where my focus was. So this was the first year I've like really tried to sit down and watch more tape on guys that don't play running back and receiver and and kind of educate myself a little bit more. And this is the first time I've actually sat down and done a whole first round mock draft and kind of put some thought into it and did some reading and things like that. So this is new territory for me, but it's one of the many reasons I'm excited to be doing stuff like this. It's a learning experience for me. And so I've watched a little bit of tape on guys, but I'm mostly relying on what I've read and then what I've just watched over the last couple of years. Just my time watching college football on Saturdays is a lot of what I'm relying on here. So it'll be interesting to see how we compare.
Gotcha. Well, yeah, I'm glad to take your mock draft cherry for sure. Um, yeah, it's something that I've done probably the last 4 or 5 years. Something I've really kind of enjoyed doing because my favorite part of the NFL, believe it or not, is not actually during the season. It's now. We get these I get to evaluate some of these college guys coming out because I'm not even a huge college guy. Like I don't really watch a lot of college football, depending on what in the playoffs I do, but a lot of the college stuff I go through is, from basically once the college season draft season kind of kicks in, then I can kind of deep dive into some prospects, which is one of my favorite things to do. And I know last episode, I think, or maybe it would have been the one before that, I said that I kind of got through about, 11, 12 guys that I had a first round grade on in this draft. And then everything else kind of drops off after that. I've made it through about 16 prospects on here, like actually doing a pretty deep dive into their like college tape and stuff. And I can kind of touch on a little bit more maybe than some other guys. But I'm definitely excited. Uh, well, this is obviously, mock draft 1.0. It's the first one we put out. This is a pre-free agency mock draft, and it doesn't include trades, but we will touch on if we do think a team is going to, make a trade, kind of how likely the scenario is there. So yeah, man, I mean, it's going to be a pretty long episode. We're really excited to kind of touch on these guys and just kind of give you guys a little bit more information if you're not, familiar with the drafts, some of these guys coming up. And then definitely after the draft, we will touch, once we kind of know where these guys are going, who the coach is going to be, who the team's going to be, we can definitely hit on more fantasy aspect of these rookies, which we're definitely looking forward to. I know Andrew's
Yeah.
really looking forward to that.
Yeah, I can't wait for that, man. That's my favorite part of the off season and draft season and stuff like that is once those dynasty pieces fall and you really can get a look at, the player and the fit. That's where I get a lot of fun. And it was really cool, honestly. Like I told you, hey, shoot me an email with your first round whenever you get done. I'll put my first round next to it and we'll just be able to go through it that way. And it was kind of cool. I didn't look at yours until mine was done, and then I threw yours up in the table, and then threw mine up next to it. And it was kind of funny to see how many players were, either right there at the same spot or close. It was kind of cool to see. So to see where we're different, where we agree, will be cool to see. But yeah, I mean, you kind of laid the groundwork of what we use to establish, to create these, the no trades and pre-free
Pre-free
agency, and then
agency.
we did we this isn't what we think NFL teams will do. This is what we think it would be good if NFL teams did, which
Yeah,
is not,
yeah. I
so
don't
that's
want you guys
something
sitting
else
there
that we
thinking
need
that
to
we're gonna,
yeah.
yeah, I don't want people sitting there thinking, because obviously, as much NFL as we both watch, we're not, you know, privy to the entire workings of every single organization. We're
Right,
pretty.
yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong. Like we know our football, and we kind of know the team needs, and we keep an eye on other teams. But I mean, obviously, I'm not going to be able to go into depth, into the Detroit Lions as much as I could the Indianapolis Colts or
Right.
things like
Yeah.
that. So,
Yeah. It's
um,
not like we got a super fan of every single team lined up to make their. Although it would be really cool, it's not like we got a super fan from every single team lined up to join us and make their team's pick and be able to break down their team the way of a super fan that's huge into football into their team would. But this is what, for the most part, outsiders looking in, this is what we think these teams should do, not what we think that they will do, which is, those are different things. So just keep that in mind as we go through this as well. This is
yeah,
just our
and
opinions.
yeah, and we'll definitely have an updated version of this, after free agency hits, after we kind of
Yeah,
get
closer
a
to
better,
draft time.
yeah, a better picture of what these teams might be thinking with some of the moves that they're going to make. So let's just go ahead and get this started. Pick
Yeah.
number one, Jacksonville Jaguars are on the clock. Not really a lot of debate about this one, and I'll go ahead and let you announce the pick, Andrew.
Yeah, this is going to be Trevor Lawrence and the quickest draft pick in quite some time. I feel like this is a no-brainer. I think his pro day just cemented that. I mean, I know there's no pads; they're out there in basketball shorts. I get all that, but just watching the arm talent and seeing everything that he's put on film over the last couple of years. I mean, the Jags got like 80 million in cap space this year. They've got 7 of the top 125 picks in this draft. So I think this is the easiest of many, many decisions to, get this rebuild off on the right foot. So they don't have to overthink this one, and they can focus on all the other big decisions they're going to have to make this offseason.
Yeah, and that's who I had as well as Trevor Lawrence. Pretty easy pick there. Um, Definitely somebody that I've really enjoyed watching. Uh, Big, mobile, smart, big arm, great mechanics. We'll see kind of how he takes to Jacksonville with Urban Meyer and the rest of that roster. I know they definitely have some good weapons there for him. They need some work on their offensive line and a little bit, more pieces on defense. But I think they're, a few really good moves if they can make this draft worth it. I think they're a few really good moves away from possibly contending here in a year or two.
Mm-hmm.
That's how highly I think of Trevor Lawrence. I think he's a fantastic prospect, probably the best one that I've seen come out in every bit of 7, 8 years at the quarterback position. So we'll go ahead and move on. That was a pretty easy one, and we have our first disagreement here with this one over the New
Yeah,
York
yeah.
Jets. I went ahead and selected Justin Fields, quarterback from Ohio State, and Andrew selected quarterback Zach Wilson from BYU. So go ahead and give me your little breakdown of why you would prefer Zach Wilson over Justin Fields at this spot.
So honestly, I I wanted to follow my heart and put Trey Lance in this spot. That's how much I love the upside of Trey Lance and how fun I think he could be. But I think where I have him going later, we'll get to that later, I think is a better fit for him than having to step in with the Jets right away. And honestly, I had a tough time putting a quarterback at all, man. I think that there's a good argument to be made that I somewhat agree with, that the Jets should just stick with Darnold for one more year and see if he can be the next player to repair his career after being freed from the curse of Adam Gase. I like Darnold a lot coming out of college to the point to where he was my favorite quarterback in that draft, which Josh Allen is now making me look like a fool, as well as Lamar, who, I mean, he was my second favorite quarterback, but um, you know, it, Darnold to this point has not lived up to what I thought he would be, but I do think that there might be a chance with Gase out the door. But what kind of made the decision for me is, I mean, with Darnold, even after this season, you have to make a decision. Like, you either got to throw him a bunch of money because he's a quarterback. If you want to keep him and he does play even decently, somebody's going to throw him money. Or you got to move on anyway. So I think just go ahead and make the transition now, save the money on the cap, take another shot at a quarterback with a rookie contract. And for Zach Wilson, for me, man, um, like I said, I love Trey Lance, and I kind of wanted to put him up here. I want so bad to make that leap to make Trey Lance my second favorite quarterback in this draft. But I don't know. I like the arm talent and just the overall skill from Zach Wilson. And I think this might be part of me, like, I don't think he has the arm. Like, I'm not saying he's going to be Josh Allen or Justin Herbert, but in the past I've faded guys that I didn't like a lot of stuff of, but they had the arm talent. And I think this is me possibly trying to right my wrongs a little bit in that aspect from the past couple years.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, those are great arguments, and this is definitely a spot that I can see New York. Maybe they stay with Sam Darnold, they move down, acquire more picks, similar to how the Colts did with the Jets during that Sam Darnold trade. Whenever the Jets moved up and picked Sam Darnold, Colts got a plethora of picks back, used it on Quentin Nelson, built the
Right.
roster around Andrew Luck, and kind of continue with that. Obviously, Luck retired and it didn't work out there, but I can kind of see a similar scenario. But if there is no trades, if they are stuck at this spot, I do like Justin Fields actually quite a little bit more than I do Zach Wilson. I think Zach Wilson, the offense he does play in, is basically used to maximize that quarterback position. So if you are a good quarterback, it's going to make you a really good to great quarterback. But we're not able to kind of see what you would look like in an NFL type of offense. Um, I think he might struggle on his reads a little bit. Obviously, his arm talent's there. He's very mobile. I think he's a great pick regardless of any organization. I just think Justin Fields has a higher ceiling, and I think at that spot there, you want the guy with that highest ceiling, kind of like you alluded to Justin Herbert. Justin Herbert obviously didn't look anything this year like the quarterback he did coming out of Oregon, but we all kind of agreed, he had huge arm talent. He had a very high ceiling, similar to Josh Allen, Justin Herbert type. And I think Justin Fields fits that mold more to me than Zach Wilson does. Prototypical size, you know, great instincts in the pocket, fantastic touch on ball, can process information well. I do think he needs some work as far as getting through his reads, but I think a lot of that was the design of the offense there at Ohio State. They're very, one read go kind of a squad. So
Right.
I think he can make every throw on the field. I think he's got elite pocket presence. He's got
Hmm.
fantastic movement, and I just think he would thrive in a situation like that. Which, granted, it is the Jets, and like I said, they do need to kind of overhaul a little bit more of their roster before I think they're ready to compete.
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely like both those options for sure. I could definitely see and agree with either one of them. I don't think you can go wrong there.
Yeah, and I
Um,
do think Fields is the safer pick, and then I mean his accuracy is just otherworldly, and it'll be interesting to see if the one read thing, to see how much of that sticks with him. If he struggles getting off of that, even if it was a product of the system that he played in, just to see if he can adapt to that no longer being the system that he's in, assuming that that ends up not being the case. But I do think he's safer than Zach Wilson, and I mean, I like the argument. Honestly, I like all my top four quarterbacks in this class. I like them all quite a bit, so I can't really complain either way.
right. So third pick, we have Miami Dolphins. I have offensive tackle Penei Sewell out of Oregon. Very young tackle prospect, very good tackle prospect.
Hmm.
Andrew is going with the wide receiver, top three pick, Jamar Chase out of LSU. So I'll go ahead and give you my breakdown real quick. Obviously, Penei Sewell, I don't think he's as much of a slam dunk offensive prospect as what you might hear from some of these other, bigger name sites, ESPN, PFF, some of these guys. I don't think he's quite as much as a slam dunk because he did only play last year at the age of 19. He's got a lot of growing to do in his body.
Hmm.
And there were, some situations that I thought he could have handled a little bit better. That being said, he still is my number one overall offensive tackle prospect. And some of that might actually play to his strength as being only a 19-year-old this past season. He's got a lot of growing to do, like basically as a kid becoming a man. And I think if you can take that skill set, you can take that athleticism, and you can refine that at the NFL level, I think you have an all pro, uh, probably top three offensive tackle in the NFL. Um, and Miami Dolphins, other than maybe the quarterback position, we'll kind of see what happens with Tua there. But I think their biggest need, obviously they've got a fantastic defense. They've got some really good wide receiver weapons out there. Um, I can definitely see them taking another wide receiver, especially with the health issues they have with Devontae Parker, Preston Williams. Obviously, those guys get nicked up a lot and miss a lot of games. But I do like the talent there at the wide receiver position. I could see them maybe even taking a tight end there. Their tight end room is pretty barren. But I think the most important, if you are going to keep Tua, you have to keep Tua upright and protected like he was at Alabama. And I think investing in that tackle position, investing in that offensive line is the way to do that. So that's kind of my take on Miami. I'll let you kind of take over here with your selection.
So I mean, I don't disagree. Like if it wasn't Jamar Chase for me, I would have been making the same pick as you. Um, but I think they should give it at least one more year to see. They invested, three decent draft capital picks last year in an offensive line. So I'd like to see how that kind of plays out. But I mean, like I've seen the word generational talent thrown around with your guy that you picked there. So I mean, maybe that's something that they don't need to pass up on. But so I mean, if they want to go that direction, if they want to go offensive line, I think they should stick at three and do it. Honestly, this would be one where if we were projecting trades and they did want to go the wide receiver route, I think this would be a good one where they would trade back a few picks with a quarterback hungry team. If wide receiver is a position that they want to upgrade on, um, with this first of their two first round picks, then I think they could afford to acquire more picks, drop back a few spots, and still be able to select a receiver. But sticking with the no trade thing, I think that you kind of spoke to Sewell's youth and needing to grow up a little bit, whereas Jamar Chase at 19 years old was a man amongst boys out there. And I just can't get that 1,800-yard, 20 touchdown season out of my head where he was going up against corners that there's a couple corners in the league that he dogged on that are like the best corner on their team in the NFL now. And, he's just now ready to make his mark in the NFL. And I love the player. This is one of the fantasy guy, like from a fantasy standpoint, this is one of the guys I've spent so much time on YouTube watching over and over just because I can't get enough of it. And to your same point about finding out if Tua is the guy or not, I'm not as wild about Miami's wide receiver room. I do like Devontae Parker. I think he's a good receiver, but outside of that, I'm not as high as a lot of people on Preston Williams and some of their other options. And I do think that to truly find out what Tua is, they need to give him another difference-making playmaker. And I don't think there's a better one than Jamar Chase in this draft. And I think if you want to stick at three and draft him, you don't even have to trade back. I think he's worth the top three pick. I think he's that good.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can't really argue there. The only thing I will say is the two deepest positions in this entire draft for me so far that I've kind of come across are the offensive tackle and the wide receiver positions. I just think there's a bigger gap between Penei Sewell and maybe some of these other offensive tackles as opposed to Jamar Chase and some of these other wide receivers. I think there's a bigger gap there that I think they can hit the wide receiver position later on with that other first round pick
Mhm.
where I think if you're picking later on in their other first round pick, I don't think you're going to have a type of offensive tackle with the talent of Sewell there. So that would be my only argument against that. But and, and also if we were projecting trades, this is a prime Deshaun Watson position right here
Mhm. Yep.
that we can definitely see Houston picking right around here and maybe selecting one of these other quarterbacks.
Yeah, that's definitely a quarterback pick at that point for me. If they do,
Yeah.
make that trade, I think that number three, all of a sudden now we've got three quarterbacks right off the rip.
Yeah. So, well, let's go to Atlanta Falcons, number 4. Let's get to another
Back
quarterback
to the
pick.
quarterbacks.
And, Andrew, I'm going to let you take this one.
Yeah, so this is kind of my dream scenario personally for Trey Lance, man, because I love watching him play. He's so much fun to watch, but I do think he still has a little ways to go and could use some time to kind of relax for a little bit after he gets drafted. I don't want to see him get thrown into the fire at the Jets or anything like that. Um, but he is my third favorite quarterback. I so bad want to end up I want to call him my second favorite quarterback, and I probably will end up doing it by the time we get to the draft. I don't know. We'll see. But, a lot more concerns with him. He was in an offense that liked to run the ball a lot. He was playing FCS competition. He only started a handful of games, only played one game this past year, but um, just the upside that I see whenever I'm watching him play, man, it's just so hard to ignore. And there's no like Matt Ryan is starting for the Falcons next year with the contract he has. I don't see any way that that doesn't happen. But I believe after next season's over, there some dead cap comes along with it. But I'm pretty sure that they can get out of Matt Ryan's contract after this upcoming season. Um, so I think that this is a great spot for him to where he can learn about some of the things that Matt Ryan does so good. It just so happens to be some areas where Trey Lance could use some improvement, learn from him a little bit, and then step into that offense. You know, if the head coach hire is as good as we think it is, we both really like the hire in the offseason. Um, I think this could mesh really well this time in 2022, and it would be something. I don't. Maybe it's just a North Dakota State thing. I don't know, man. I love Carson Wentz. Whenever he came out, he was my number one quarterback. He was who I wanted the Rams to trade whenever they traded up to number one. So maybe I just, for some reason, like North Dakota State. I don't
Hey,
know, man.
hey,
But for whatever reason,
shout out to Colts quarterback Carson Wentz.
right, right. So for whatever reason, man, I can't quit him. I just love watching Trey Lance, and this is where I'm kind of mocking this to happen because I want to speak it to existence. This is what I want to see for him.
Yeah, and I have a quarterback. It is a different quarterback, which another really good argument. I have Zach Wilson from BYU, quarterback that you had going number 2 overall. I think this is a prime trade scenario for Atlanta. Maybe they drop back with Philadelphia, Carolina, Denver, possibly. I can see them moving into this spot if they're not necessarily set on um, one of these quarterbacks, and they'd rather move back and maybe take a Trey Lance, maybe a couple picks down. But in the, basically, for this mock, I have them taking the best quarterback available on the board in Zach Wilson, letting him sit behind Matt Ryan for a year, kind of pick up the offense, similar to kind of what Mahomes and some of these other guys did with Alex Smith, and ready to take over next year, like you said. Now I do like Trey Lance's talent a lot, or ceiling. I think he's, other than Trevor Lawrence, I think Trey Lance might have the highest ceiling in the draft, but I think he also has the lowest floor out of all these guys.
Yeah, I
And
could agree with that.
I don't necessarily know if you could pass up a safer option with really good upside in Zach Wilson, just for the off chance of maybe hitting that. I think either one of these guys, there's a minor talent difference. Obviously, I think Trey Lance is a little more mobile, but yeah, I just think they take the safest quarterback position, or quarterback left on the board, let him sit behind Matt Ryan, let him learn. Um, but like I said, if this was me making this decision, I'm moving back, acquiring more picks, and maybe getting a Trey Lance, right around. Maybe I'm moving with Carolina at 8, having Carolina move up, get Zach Wilson, and then maybe I'm right there. If Trey Lance possibly falls, I don't know if Philadelphia is going to want to pick another North Dakota State guy, but if they do, if Trey Lance is able to fall, maybe Atlanta gets him at number 8, and they're able to get more picks back as well. So yeah, let's move on to pick number 5. I have tight end slash wide receiver. He's not really much of a tight end in my eyes, but I think he's an extremely talented guy's just an absolute monster. Kyle Pitts, out of Florida, fantastic receiving prospect, and I think if Miami does not go with Sewell here, I think what your option, you had them taking Sewell. That's their dream scenario, I think, but I don't know if he makes it past then. That's what I would do if he was still on my board, but I had him going at number 3. So I take the next best, receiving prospect, kind of help Joe Burrow. I know they still need a little bit of offensive line help, but I think the opportunity to pair, Higgins with Pitts, because
Tyler Boyd.
yeah, Tyler Boyd, maybe, John Ross comes back maybe for a year. I think he's probably gone, but it's possible. But I think the talent is too good to pass up there at that spot. And I think Joe Burrow having those elite weapons can definitely lead um, to some very fun games for Bengals fans. I still think they're a little ways away from competing, especially depending on the health of Burrow and how he comes back from that knee. But if anything, with this pick, their games will definitely be entertaining.
Right.
So yeah, I'll go ahead and let you take your selection.
Yeah, so I mean, I agree with what you said about Pitts, and honestly, it's kind of funny you said, if Sewell was on the board, that would be who you would pick, and that you think this is the dream situation for the Bengals. Because on my notes that I wrote down, literally the very first sentence is, "I think this is the dream situation for the Bengals." Like, I mean, if you watched any Bengals game, it was extremely obvious what they needed on the offensive side of the ball. You didn't have to watch very many snaps and watch Joe Burrow run for his life very many times to know that they need an upgrade. And if the best offensive tackle in the draft falls to you at number 5 and you have that big of a hole, it's kind of a no-brainer for me. So this one was, with him still being on the board, this is one of the easiest things for me to put in. I do like the Kyle Pitts fit. If he wasn't there, I agree with what you're saying. I mean, like, he's not a tight end in terms of like blocking and things like that, but he can line up anywhere you would line up a tight end and anywhere you would line up a receiver and catch the ball effectively out of all the spots.
He's a
And
weapon.
yeah, yeah, he is an offensive weapon that
He's
is.
and it's funny he plays at Florida because I think he's if basically Percy Harvin was a tight end prospect, I think you would have Kyle Pitts.
Yeah, so he's a special player. So you don't usually see tight ends go even be projected to go that high, so that that he's not, your normal tight end. So I don't have a problem with that. But yeah, I basically mocked what would be my dream scenario. This is another one of those things of wanting to mock it into existence, because since he needs this so bad, and Joe Burrow needs this so bad. So this is what I hope ends up happening.
Yeah, definitely. I think that would be. I think either way you go, but if I am the Bengals, I am hoping, you know, Sewell does fall down to me at number 5. That's a dream scenario for them. So number 6, we have the Philadelphia Eagles, who are now in the quarterback market. Possibly, we've heard some talks about them selecting one of these quarterbacks now to compete with Jalen Hurts. Um, but I think if they don't go quarterback here, I think they definitely need to work on their offense as a whole. I think this, basically the team in general just needs a lot of work on it. Um, their offensive line was not very good, but I think it's serviceable when you have a mobile guy back there that can escape and do some of the stuff. Obviously, those 4 games he started last year, I believe he took 15 sacks in those 4 games. That's no bueno, but maybe getting a guy that can get open will help take some of those sacks because there was no windows to throw to those wide receivers. They were having to hold on to the ball a lot last year and take some of those sacks. So with this pick, I have the Philadelphia Eagles selecting your guy that you had at number 3, Jamar Chase, wide receiver out of LSU. I think him, another year of development for Rager. I think they could possibly form a very dynamic wide receiver duo. Obviously, they cut Alshon Jeffrey. They're cutting Deshaun Jackson. That wide receiver core is even more barren now than it was last year, even though both those guys were hurt. I don't think there's any way you can go wrong here with any one of these receivers in this draft. So I think Jamar Chase is the best one available. I think they take him at number 6 and get Jalen Hurts some help as opposed to some competition in the quarterback room.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's a smart way to go. I mean, Jalen Hurts, there were definitely ups and downs with Jalen Hurts, but I think he showed you enough to at least show that he should get a chance to show that he's the guy, and you should be able, you should surround him with better weapons and see what you've got before you throw him into another quarterback competition, throwing another first round pick at a quarterback whenever there's so many other needs and you have somebody that's at least shown something. So I went the same direction with wide receiver. Jamar Chase was already off my board, so I put in the receiver who I honestly could end up being the first, the Heisman winner. I mean, you talk about needing somebody to get open. This guy's going to get open and he's going to catch the ball whenever you throw it to him once he does get open too. I've seen a bunch of stuff about his concerns about his size and things like that, but he's just such a pure receiver, man, that it's hard for me to be bothered by it. I do think there's an argument for Jalen Waddle to be the second best receiver in this. Rondell Moore, Rashad Bateman. I mean, there's several guys where if you wanted to slot them in as the wide receiver 2 for this class, you're not going to get an argument from me. I'm going to argue all day for Jamar Chase as wide receiver one, but after that, 2 through 4 or 5 is a very fluid conversation to me. But um, right now, I'm sitting on Devontae Smith. So for my second receiver coming off the board, I got him landing in Philly right here.
Gotcha. So we both kind of had wide receivers, different way we got there, but same result. The only argument I do have with the quarterback position there is you don't know when you're going to be this high in the draft again to get one of these top quarterbacks. It's very hard. Obviously, the last time they did this, they had to trade a boatload of assets to get up there
Mm-hmm.
to select Carson Wentz. Whereas this, you're sitting there at number 6. Maybe one of these guys is still on the board. Maybe they fall. You don't know if you're going to be picking this high again for a while. Who knows? So they
And
might
that's
they might
fair. And
they might want to
it's
take that opportunity while they're there.
it's funny you said that because that was kind of my same argument for Atlanta not trading back and not risking. I mean, obviously, if Atlanta could trade back and get Trey Lance at 8, I would like that because I got him taking Trey Lance at 4. But for Atlanta, I think that their poor performance has been more due to lack of coaching and just terrible injury luck. Like I think they have a decent amount of talent on the roster. They obviously have plenty of holes, or they wouldn't be up this high. But I think for Matt Ryan playing with a competent head coach and everyone on the team being healthy, I think they have a decent chance of being in the mid rounds next year. And then Matt Ryan being gone, and now you're stuck in the middle of the rounds, and you got to wait another year. Whereas the Eagles, if Jalen Hurts ain't it, I fully would be banking on the Eagles to be back up in this spot. Like I think that their roster is at the point where if Hurts ain't the guy and he's not winning you games and you guys are still losing, then I think that one's where I would bet on the Eagles being back in the spot. But I think for both teams, the Falcons and the Eagles, that's a fair argument. And whenever you got a chance to possibly if your guy in the draft is there at your pick, it's tough to say no, don't pick him. So I definitely I get where you're coming from too.
Well, gotcha. So let's move on to number 7. We have the Detroit Lions. Um, my pick is a little bit subject to change here because I don't really know the roster of Detroit that well. I know they've needed cornerback help for a while, but they did select, I believe it was, what was the cornerback they selected? Jeff Okuda last year,
Yeah, Kuda.
which I know he had a pretty down rookie year. But I know they also picked a guy, is the second year cornerback, Amani Oruwariye, I think, and he had a really good season for them. So I think either way you go here, I think if you do select a cornerback, I'd have them select a cornerback, Caleb Farley. He was a former wide receiver for Virginia Tech, converted this last season into cornerback. Just has been playing outstanding football. Very, height, weight, speed kind of a cornerback. Can mirror receivers. He's much more of a press man kind of a cornerback. He wants to get up in your face, put his hands on you, let his athleticism guide you where he wants to go. And I can kind of see them going and solidifying finally that cornerback position with, maybe Okuda takes the leap that he was, projected to be a top 5, cornerback last year. Maybe he takes the leap. Farley comes in, can maybe play that 2 role. And then you have, the Aurorier guy, um, can maybe play in the slot nickel cornerback position. And I think you have a lockdown cornerback room, and that position is set, for at least the next decade there, possibly. Um, but this is one of those rosters that they could just use help all over that defense. I really like your selection. You took linebacker Micah Parsons out of Penn State. He opted out this year, I do believe, so he didn't
Yeah, he
play.
did.
But obviously, the games that he did play last season, he's very flash. He reminds me so much of Darius Leonard. He's a very Darius Leonard type of a linebacker, very rangy, makes big plays, plays well above his playing weight. I believe he played at 215, which is the same weight Leonard played at this year. And you think of a linebacker playing at 215 pounds, you think that's absolutely insane. But we have an all-pro linebacker that played at that weight. And whenever you have the physical tools and the mental tools of a guy like Micah Parsons, um, I don't think you can go wrong. So I think as long as it's a defensive pick,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's either way they can go wrong here.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, for me, it was kind of just connecting a couple of dots of, after they traded for Jared Goff, the talk was he was kind of a bridge quarterback. And if he's your bridge quarterback, there's a decent chance he's going to be the starting quarterback of the Lions for at least 2 years before he really has an out in his contract. Now, I mean, he could ride the bench if they find the quarterback of the future sooner, but I think that I think they're a couple years away from really even kickstarting this rebuild in a heavy way. And there's reports that Kenny Galladay is going to get franchise tagged, and if that wasn't the case, I think wide receiver could also be, a landing spot here, just because I mean Kenny Galladay, Marvin Jones, Danny Amendola, they're all out of the picture after this year if Kenny Galladay doesn't get franchise tagged. So, um, but if he gets franchise tag, if Goff really is a bridge gap quarterback, and you've got a little bit of time before you're ready to select your quarterback of the future, I think it's just important to build up the offensive line and build up the defense and get that roster ready for whenever you are ready to, make your mark on your franchise quarterback. And for me, I think Micah Parsons could end up being the best defensive player in this draft. And so, it just kind of was an easy fit for me whenever I was looking at it, whenever I was kind of taking a look at the line. So yeah, I ended up going with Micah.
Yeah, gotcha. Like I said, I think either way you go there, that's a good pick. So number 8, Carolina. Um, I'm just going to caveat this with saying this is my prime Deshaun Watson landing spot right now.
Yep.
I think Deshaun Watson somehow finds a way to Carolina. So I think Houston is going to end up with a pick here. But I don't think the results are going to be any different. I think they select a quarterback. If Carolina does keep this pick, I think they do select a cornerback, whichever one of these guys is left out of the top 4. So with that being said, mine that was left over was Trey Lance, your boy out of North Dakota State. Um, and you've obviously hit on him. We've already hit on him. So I've already hit on Justin Fields, who
Which was
ended up
my
being your
selection to
selection.
Carolina. Yeah.
So I think we can just go ahead and move on. The Denver, we won't spend the whole thing talking about these rookie quarterbacks.
Yeah. Right.
So Denver is another possible trade destination
Hmm.
here with Deshaun Watson, and then maybe even trading up in the draft to get one of these quarterbacks because I don't think they're quite sold on Drew Lock. But that being said, um, they do need some help there at the cornerback position. I have them selecting Patrick Surtain, the cornerback out of Alabama, and I think he's just right there as far as production with Caleb Farley. I think Caleb Farley's upside's a little bit higher, but certainly not a bad consolation prize. Obviously,
Right.
anytime you have a cornerback coming out of Alabama, they've played in a pro style defense. They've played against elite wide receivers in the SEC,
And
like
in
Jamal
practice.
Chase. So I mean, I think Patrick Surtain is a great. He's another one of these press corners that want to get up and kind of play the kind of defense that Vic Fangio likes to run there in Denver. He can be a fantastic asset for that team, and maybe we'll see what happens with Von Miller and some of these other guys.
Mhm.
If Von Miller is cut, I can see them kind of going edge here as well. So we'll see where that lands. But as of right now, my pick is Patrick Surtain, cornerback out of Alabama.
Yeah, and I went the same exact position. I just went with a guy that you already had off the board. That is also my favorite cornerback in this draft was Caleb Farley. I think it makes too much sense. With AJ Bouye out of the picture, they need the upgrade there. And for in my instance, the best cornerback on the board is still there. So I do echo all your sentiments that I think that the Broncos are a prime team to either try to get Watson and move this pick or to move up. This is still very in that range to where I'm not sold on Drew Lock either. And if their guy is still available, I think it would be wise for them to move up and try to go get him because they've got the playmakers, God knows, on offense to make something happen if they can get the right guy under center. So I think that makes a lot of sense. But for our sake, with no trades, they're sticking right here. I think cornerback makes the most sense. And I basically agree with everything you said about Farley earlier in your breakdown. So easy
Gotcha.
enough.
All right. Well, let's round out our top 10 here with the Dallas Cowgirls or boys. Sorry. Um, I'm just messing. I just don't like the Cowboys. Um, so I'm sure after they make this pick, we'll hear about how they're once again Super Bowl contenders. Same thing we've heard for 25 years. That being said, they will disappoint. And I can see Jerry Jones going running back here, possibly wide receiver again, quarterback maybe. I'm just kidding. So I have personally my favorite cornerback in this draft out of all the guys available, and that is cornerback J.C. Horn out of South Carolina. I just think this guy is an absolute freak athlete. He's almost in that Patrick Peterson mold. I don't think he's as good as Peterson was coming out of college, but I can definitely see him playing up to that level if his upside does hit. Um, Obviously, the Cowboys have been in need for a cornerback, possibly linebacker help as well, because Van Der Esch just can't stay healthy. Jalen Smith took a humongous step back this year. Um, Defensive line needs some help too. Offensive line needs some help. I just think there's so many holes in this roster that they can hit on. That being said, Byron Jones left in free agency last year to go join Miami. There there's a big hole left in that secondary.
Mhm.
Um, and I think anytime you can have a guy with the upside that JC Horn has, I don't think you can let him fall past 10. And I think that makes two drafts in a row now that they've got a guy that has fallen that should not be there at that position, there for them to draft.
Yeah. Yeah, they did great with CeeDee Lamb last year. So um, it could end up shaking out that way at the cornerback position again this year. And I mean, I think even if they go with my selection, who you just felt took off the board to Denver with, the cornerback out of Alabama, with Patrick Surtain, that's where whenever I looked at this team as well, I mean, assuming the offensive line is back to health, and they do get back Dak Prescott back under center, whether it's the franchise tag or a long-term deal. I mean, the defense gave up the third most passing touchdowns in the league last year. So it was pretty easy to kind of connect the dots on that one. And for me, with Surtain still on the board on my side, that this was another really easy one to write in. So not a lot of complications, for these last couple picks.
Gotcha. Well, that rounds out our top 10 here. So we'll kind of just get a little bit more speedy. That way we're not taking, 4 hours for this podcast. Um, so right now, number 11, we have the New York Giants. I have them selecting Micah Parsons, which you had him going number 7 to Detroit. I think he does fall a little bit because there is some questions about his size and the fact that he didn't play this last year.
Right.
So I think he can be a candidate that might fall, but if he's there, I think New York Giants, they run the card up there, get some more help. I don't, you know, there's another team that could possibly be in the mix for quarterback help. I don't think they're sold on Daniel Jones. Um, but that being said, I think they stick it out at least another year. They
Yeah.
had some pretty decent offensive line help last year. And obviously Saquon comes back. I think they need to kind of start focusing more on the defensive side of their ball again. So I think Micah Parsons fixes the biggest weakness on that roster, which I think is linebacker. And they get a very rangy guy who can go make plays, play the passing game, can stop some of these, quick outs that, teams are liking to throw now, the screen passes. He can make those sideline to sideline plays. So I have them taking Micah Parsons.
Yeah, I like it. Obviously, I mean, he's already off for me. So, on my end, I had to go whenever I looked at New York. This was a spot where I really wanted to, Kyle Pitts is still falling for me. And as much as I love Kyle Pitts, I don't like that he's falling. And I wanted to plug him in here, despite the fact they have Evan Ingram. Um, with Evan Ingram really not producing to the point to where most people thought he would, and then Golden Tate's probably gone, and who knows with Sterling Shepard and with his injury history and things like that. But so I wanted to do Kyle Pitts here, but with their pass rush just being so bad, I mean, they didn't have a single edge defender with more than 4 sacks last year. Their sack leader Leonard Williams is likely gone in free agency. So from what I've looked at on video, from what I've read from people that really dig into the draft, is kind of between Kwity Paye, this guy right here from Michigan, or Russo from Miami as the top edge defender. And after watching a little bit of stuff the last couple of days, I settled in on Kwity Paye from Michigan as my favorite edge defender, and so I kind of just plugged him in here for New York.
Yeah, I think either way they go there, that's another really good pick for them. Like I said, I think they need to start building that defense up some, and I think either way you go, Obviously, New York has always been known as having a really good pass rushing core, basically since the 80s. So why not add another guy there? So now we'll move on to San Francisco. Um, you know, possibly another quarterback market. I don't necessarily think that they're going to be in the Deshaun Watson sweepstakes, but there has been some talk about Kirk Cousins possibly being moved there to rejoin. So we'll kind of see what happens with that. But that being said, I think um, Kyle Shanahan gets another weapon on that offense to join Debo Samuel and their first round pick last year.
You?
But yep, Brandon Ayuk. So I think if you give this guy a weapon like a Jalen Waddle, who I do have them selecting, because there's a lot of noise going back and forth between Devontae Smith and Jalen Waddle. I've heard a lot of teams have Jalen Waddle as the highest other wide receiver outside of Jamar Chase in this draft. And they have Devontae Smith as the lower NFL. Now, obviously, Devontae Smith, Heisman winner, great college guy, but there are some questions about his NFL acumen and how he projects at the next level. Where I think some teams might think Jalen Waddle's game is a little more suited for that NFL level. He's another guy that, excuse me, he can touch the ball and, you know, blink of an eye, he's 70 yards down the field and a touchdown. So I think you combine him with Ayuk, you combine him with Debo Samuel, and you have another weapon there. George Kittle comes back healthy. Kyle Shanahan has all kinds of toys, for Jimmy Garoppolo, basically to take almost all the pressure off of him. And I think if that defense comes back healthy, they're automatically right back there in that Super Bowl conversation.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of where I see it. Now, obviously, they do have some cornerback issues, which is where your next pick leads into, especially with Richard Sherman and some of these other guys, leaving this year. We'll see if they do end up coming back or not. But I just think they can figure that position out possibly in free agency. And anytime you have a guy with the talent and the speed of Jalen Waddle there on the board, I just think it's going to be too much for Kyle Shanahan to pass up.
Yeah, it's definitely not out of the question. And but yeah, what you alluded to basically, I mean, it seems like pretty much every cornerback of that is, relevant that was on San Francisco's team last year already has one foot out the door right now. So I saw a clear hole there, and I saw a player still on the board, J.C. Horn, that you already did a great job breaking down that I didn't disagree with anything with, still on the board. So while it would be very exciting and a lot more fun to project another offensive weapon for Shanahan to have fun with, I ended up going the cornerback direction with J.C. Horn out of South Carolina. Honestly, I really didn't know what to do with this team because I could see them cutting Jimmy G and going after their favorite quarterback, trading up for a quarterback,
Definitely.
trading for a quarterback. I could see that happening, but I could also see them riding it out for another year with Jimmy G and just seeing what they got, and so that's the scenario I'm playing with this pick. Is I think they give Jimmy G one more go. They try to start kind of, building up that secondary again, and they go with JC Horn.
Yeah. And see, Atlanta, I know, is your dream scenario for Trey Lance. The 49ers is my dream scenario for Trey Lance. If there's a way they can
Yeah,
move up
that would be
there,
great. Yeah.
if there's a way he's on the board and they can move up to grab him, that would be awesome because I think the talent, combine that with those weapons and that defense, um, and with the way obviously we know Kyle Shanahan, to me, one of the top 5 coaches right now in the NFL, probably outside of Andy Reid, the best offensive mind. Him and Sean McVay, you can kind of argue for that 2 and 3 spot, but I think both
Right.
those guys are right there.
Yeah.
And I just think maybe he doesn't even need that year to set to be successful, because you're going to have a coach and weapons and a defense and a pretty decent offensive line on top of that, especially if they can re-sign Trent Williams or maybe even franchise tag him back, to be his blindside protector. I think that's a great fit for them. But if they do stay the way they are, I just think the talent of Jalen Waddle is too much for them to pass up. So let's move on to 13, the Los Angeles Chargers. We have the same player here, guy that I've definitely scouted quite a bit here the last month or so. Rashawn Slater, he's an offensive tackle out of Northwestern. Now he is 6'3". There's some people that project him to move inside because of that length. and some of the issues with size, but I think his athleticism, he's just a fantastic athlete at that
Yeah.
position. I think he can definitely move out and play at that position on the edge. Um, and obviously, with the Chargers, we know they've got their franchise quarterback. They have the weapons. That defense gets healthy. The biggest question mark on that team right now, other than health, is the offensive line position. And
Hmm.
anytime you get that franchise guy, trust me, as a Colts fan, anytime you get that franchise guy, you have to protect him. You have to do everything you can to protect him. So I don't see any way that they're not taking the offensive line with that pick.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this was another one that was kind of, as you said, we landed on the same guy, Rashawn Slater out of Northwestern. I mean, before he opted out in 2020 and 2019, he only gave up 5 pressures the entire season. So I mean, regardless of where you want to stick him, I think he's a great prospect. And like you said, you've got what looks like to be a franchise quarterback. You've got a solid running back. You've got great pass catching weapons, and you've got a lot of talent on the defensive side of the ball. If they can please just let them stay healthy, because I'm not a Chargers fan, but I just want to see that defense stay healthy and see what it can do. Um, so yeah, keep that franchise quarterback on his feet, protect him. He was my next best offensive lineman, so this one was easy to plug in.
Gotcha. All right, so 14, Minnesota. We also have the same guy here. Mine's thinking alike again. We have Gregory Rousseau, uh, really lengthy, bendy edge rusher out of Miami. Guy's another athletic specimen. I think there's actually some kind of talk about him running in, um, the 4.3, 4.4 range at the combine, which as a defensive end, that's just
That would be
absurd.
unreal. Yeah.
That's absurd. So I definitely Minnesota's been looking for that pass rusher for a while now. Obviously, they traded those picks, and they tried to get Ngakwe going. That didn't work out there. They ended up, um, he's a free agent now, and then obviously it didn't end up working out there with him. So I think anytime you compare him with the pass rushing they already do have there, I believe. Oh, I can't remember what's the other pass rusher's name. Fantastic pass rusher. Um, Actually, an All-Pro guy. He was hurt this year, and I think they're
Danielle Hunter.
getting him. What?
Danielle Hunter.
Yes, yeah, Daniel Hunter. Guy's a fantastic edge rusher. Probably one of the top 5 in the league when he's healthy. And I think if you can pair Gregory Rousseau with a guy like that,
Hmm.
you definitely have the makings of a great defensive line on their way there. So, is there anything else you want to touch on with Rousseau?
Yeah, no, I mean, no, I think you're exactly right. I mean, they were bottom 5 in terms of both sacks and pressure rate last year, which injuries played a part in that, but lack of talent and talent leaving, also I think played a part in that as well. So I mean, they could use a couple more people, like maybe 2 more pieces on the offensive lines, or if there's an offensive lineman they really like here, with as much as they love to run the ball. I think that could make sense too, but there is some risk baked in with this because Rousseau really only has like 1 year of college football behind him. So, there's some risk there. But man, he he looks explosive just, from the little bit I've watched of him. So I think with the need at the position and then his upside, I think it's worth it, at this point.
Gotcha. All right. Well, so we'll move 15. We have the New England Patriots, and we do have different selection here. I had them taking wide receiver Devontae Smith out of Alabama. I think Bill Belichick might finally get the bugaboo of selecting terrible wide receivers off his back here. Um, uh, and I think they might, the top 4 quarterbacks are gone. They could go with the guy that you have. I'll let you speak more on him. Uh, but I just think the talent level of the wide receiver position is still a huge need in New England. Anytime you have a
Mm,
Heisman Trophy winner like Devontae Smith on the board still there, I think they might try, to trade back in to the end of the first round, or possibly pick up a guy, maybe like a Kyle Trask or somebody like that in the second and try their
right.
hand with that, or maybe bring another veteran in. Obviously we saw Cam Newton didn't work out, but I think, obviously a guy like Jacoby Brissett is still available there, that they can bring in a free agency, has familiarity with the area and the system, and can possibly give them a stopgap or be a lower end kind of a starter. And if you give them weapons like Devontae Smith, um, I think that's just a fantastic landing place for him. And I think Bill Belichick and Josh McDaniels, the offensive coordinator, can get the most out of him as a receiver.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, honestly, I struggled not mocking either Kyle Pitts or Jalen Waddle, who are still on the board for me to New England. And I really don't know what to think about Mac Jones, to be honest. I'm not a huge fan of him. He's easily the fifth quarterback for me this year. I mean, based on how he played in college, I could end up being completely wrong. Um, but I mean, it's so tough with Alabama quarterbacks, man. I mean, you got either some people either consider Najee Harris to be the best or second best running back in football. You were throwing to the Heisman winner, but a few games of Jalen Waddle is still good weapons, good offensive line. It's really tough for me to know how much was Mac Jones and how much was the pieces around him. So, but he is the last quarterback I think that'll go in the first. The Patriots have a needed quarterback. I mean, it wouldn't be honestly, it wouldn't be surprising to see a team leap New England and pick Mac Jones earlier than this. That wouldn't shock me a bit. Um, but yeah, so I ended up landing on Mac Jones. The whole Belichick Saban connection narrative thing, kind of, that's in there too. I mean, I'm sure Bill Belichick's probably heard more about Mac Jones than any other head coach in the NFL up to this point. So it's tough, man. I'm up in the air with Mac Jones, but it wouldn't. This is a logical landing spot for me. That's not going to surprise me if it does happen.
Gotcha. Yeah, can't disagree with anything you said. I can definitely see them making that move there if he's available. I'm not really that high on Mac Jones. I think, he is what he is. I don't think he has the arm strength to push the ball. I think he's a very accurate quarterback. He's not going to hurt you, but I think whenever you're picking at that spot, you're picking in the top 15, you're not going to want to pick a quarterback that's just not going to hurt you. You need a guy that can carry the franchise, and I just don't think he's
Hmm.
that guy. Um, so I think I have them selecting the best player on the board, and it just so happens that that's at a position of need for that team as well. I think it's a fantastic marriage, but I can see where you're going with that as well. So 16, we have Arizona. I have them selecting the offensive guard, Elijah Vera Tucker out of USC, just an absolute road grader at that position. Um, I think he does have some work to do in pass protection, but I think that can come in time. I think he's just a very, very big, very great guy that you can plug into the run game. And we all know, kind of like, in that offense, they kind of want to run the ball, whether it be with the quarterback or the wide or the running back. And whenever you have, Kyler Murray back there, they neglected that position last year, getting him some offensive line help, and it definitely kind of reared its head. Obviously, you want the weapons and stuff that he has, and I think they could
Yes, I
possibly,
do.
yeah, they can obviously, use a little bit more weapons, but I just think this is finally the pick that you have to use to get him some protection. So I have them selecting the guard out of USC, Elijah Vera Tucker.
Yeah, and I agree with what you're saying, but I think this pick right here is why, in my mind, I kept letting Kyle Pitts fall, is because this is another one of those things where this is just what I want to see happen, man. I want to see that explosive playmaker play tight end in this offense that needs some production at that position. And I think that this would be so much fun, man. Like, I mean, he made sense in New England, the Giants, several other teams before this, but I just kept letting him fall. And then whenever Arizona finally came up, I was like, I can't do it anymore. This is, they need offensive line help, but this would just be too much fun. And even being a Rams fan in the NFC West, as much as I would hate this pick on draft day, watching it, getting to see it live out in fantasy world and things like that, I think that this would just be too fun to pass up. So I finally ended the fall of Kyle Pitts, who is probably top 5-7 talent. Here at 16, this is where I got him plugged in.
Yeah, I think if there's any way Kyle Pitts is on the board, I can definitely see them making the move. But even with all the weapons, I mean, you're going to have some time to throw to these weapons.
Yeah, yeah,
And I just, you know, I don't think they do right now. I think they finally need to address their trenches because that's their biggest issue is their trenches.
yeah, makes
Um,
sense.
so we'll move on to the Las Vegas Raiders. I think John Gruden and them take the next best wide receiver on the board. Um, to me, which I mean, all these guys are kind of right there, like you alluded to earlier. But I think the size of Rashad Bateman and the route running of Rashad Bateman, he reminds me quite a bit of Devontae Adams with the side. Now, obviously, I'm not saying the guy's as good as Devontae Adams out of college. So before y'all turn that around, I'm just saying with the way his twitch, the way he
Hey,
runs around, he's probably the most polished route runner at the
coming
wide
out of
receiver.
college and like his first couple years in the league, Devontae Adams didn't look all that hot. So,
Yeah,
it's not that crazy saying Rashad Bateman looks better than Devontae Adams coming into the league.
yeah,
But yeah,
and like
continue.
honestly, like if this is a pick that I hope if he's there for the Colts, I'd love if he fell and got to the Colts. But I think Vegas, obviously with Tyrell Williams, they're going to cut him. Henry Ruggs, we'll kind of see what happens with that. He kind of came on towards the end of the year there, but I still think he's more of a weapon as opposed to just a true outside guy. They have Nelson Aguilar there. And it seems like with reports today of them possibly being in conversations with Derek Carr for another massive extension, they're committed to Derek Carr for the long haul.
Yeah.
I think they have a great offensive line. I think their defense could still use some work, but I just think if you're going to commit to Derek Carr, I think you need to get him the weapons. Darren Waller there at that tight end position um, is, obviously we know what he is. But I still think there's too many question marks at the receiver. So I think they take the next best guy, the guy they can plug in, and maybe go with Henry Ruggs and maybe go with the receiver they took, last year. I can't remember which one it was. Who was the receiver that they got? It wasn't Henry Ruggs. It was the other one they picked him
Oh,
up.
the one they
Brian
got
Edwards.
later. Yeah, Brian
Yeah, yeah,
Edwards. That was
Brian Edwards.
kind of similar to Bateman. Not as good of a prospect, but kind of similar in terms of role to Bateman. And Brian Edwards really didn't like. I liked Edwards a lot coming out of college, but he really didn't have the rookie season a lot of people hoped he would.
Yeah,
So
well, I think he dealt with some injuries as well. So we'll
yeah,
see
yeah.
what happens with another year. But I think you have a trio of Edwards, Ruggs, and then you have a guy that I think can be a bona fide wide receiver one on day one. I mean, I think coming in there day one, he has a possibility of having. I don't think he'll, have the season Justin Jefferson had, but I think the type of impact Justin Jefferson had as just coming in and being an automatic wide receiver one on that team. I think he's right there. So I'll let you kind of go with your pick here.
Yeah, and I love it, man. I love Bateman as a player. So I would love the fit. I went defense, and honestly, I mean, as much as they've invested in the defensive line lately, I feel like I shouldn't be going defensive line. And if they would have drafted Josh Allen early in the first round, whenever they chose to take a different pass rusher instead of Josh Allen, I might not be having to make this pick. But even after the investments they've made, I still don't think that their defensive line is what it should be. So I've got Jason Oweya out of Penn State to come in there and try to help the pass rush a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. I can see that happening as well. I don't necessarily think they might go with edge. I think linebacker could use some help. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
cornerback,
Yep.
safety. I know they've had some pretty bad injury luck there at the safety position. I know their strong safety. I can't remember, his name off the top of my head, but he reminds me a lot of Sanders as far as their game. Bob Sanders, cornerback or strong safety for the Colts back in the day, just very reckless. And with that play style does come the injuries. So I can see them going defensive backfield there, but I just think you got to get Derek Carr some more help and see what happens with that. So Miami with their second pick here, I think they take a guy, um, Zaven Collins, the linebacker out of Tulsa. Haven't really watched a ton of tape on him, but I do know that he does have some pretty decent athleticism, that he can kind of play in that Kyle Van Noy role. And what's a better guy to learn from other than Kyle Van Noy? So I think Miami can continue to build that defense into just an absolute monster unit. And obviously, they got the offensive tackle help. Um, I think depending on the wide receiver here, they could possibly go with that, but I just don't think any of these guys that are left is that going to be that big of a difference as opposed to a guy they can get at the beginning of the second round. So I think they take the next best linebacker prospect here. Well, actually, not the next best. I do have another linebacker rated ahead of him, but I think he just fits that defense a lot better.
Yeah, so I basically did just take my next favorite linebacker prospect and plug them in here. And from what I mean, Miami's defense overall is pretty solid. And I think Brian Flores does have them playing a little bit above their abilities just because of how good of a coach he is. I think a lot of him as a head coach. But from what I have read about Miami is that this is one of the few positions that they could use an upgrade over. I think the guy's name that got highlighted in the article was like a Landon Roberts or something like that, was a linebacker that they could use an upgrade on. And so I've got Jeremiah Owasua Koromoa from Notre Dame. That's my next favorite linebacker. Had to get a little bit more familiar with him, but I watched some videos, man, and it was, I mean, the dude, he's another guy. Apparently, I like small linebackers because he's another guy that plays relatively small. I think he
Yeah.
played the exact same weight as Darius Leonard,
Yeah,
kind
I
of
was
like how
gonna
you talked
say, so I
about
did make a
Parsons.
mistake earlier with Micah Parsons. I got him confused with Jeremiah Owusu Koromoa. So Micah Parsons is 6'3", 245. The guy I had in my head was the guy you're talking about now, who did play at the
Yeah.
same weight. So that was a mistake on my part. I just
Yeah,
want
I
to
wasn't
clear
going to
that
bring up
up.
a debate because I wasn't sure about Micah Parsons' weight off the top of my head, but I did
Yeah,
know that this guy did play small. But man, he's fun to watch though. And so, I mean, if the information I read, the article I read about this being a position of need was correct for Miami, I think with them already, taking the upside of Jamar Chase and addressing that wide receiver position early, I think it makes sense to continue to put pieces around Tua to see if he can be successful or not, and fill that hole on the defense and let those guys get back to work. So that's where I ended up landing with Jeremiah Owasua Koromoa.
gotcha. So number 19, we have the Washington football team, and I have them selecting quarterback Mac Jones out of Alabama. I have that slide. Now, I don't think he warrants this pick. I think he, is a little bit later. I've got him probably rated in the 40s, early 40s, late 30s as far as a prospect goes. But obviously,
Right.
when you're talking quarterback, those guys are going to get pushed up the board extremely high. And I think the slide stops here with Washington. Um, Obviously, they have a defense ready to compete now. They need some help on the offensive line, but I think their wide receiver position is, it's iffy depending on what they do in free agency. I think they might target some guys in free agency there. Um, but I think Logan Thomas's emergence as the tight end can kind of help solidify that position. And they just basically need a quarterback that is able to get the ball to those weapons and let them work. Antonio Gibson's a fantastic running back as well. Um, so we'll kind of see with what that happens. But I think they have a roster. Obviously, they made the playoffs last year, and you know gave Tom Brady, in the Super Bowl champion Buccaneers, a pretty good run for their money there for the most part in that game. So they're ready to compete. They just need a quarterback that is able to distribute the ball. And Mac Jones, say what you want about his arm strength, but I think he's a very smart guy, extremely accurate guy, a la basically like a lower rated version of Drew Brees the last few years.
Or
Uh,
maybe Alex Smith.
yeah, maybe some Alex Smith. Yeah, that'd be a
you
really
know,
good guy that I'd compare to. I think Alex Smith is way more mobile,
right.
but yeah, I can definitely see that comparison as well. So I have them selected Mac Jones.
Okay. Yeah, I had them addressing the wide receiver position, and whenever this pick came up, I kind of smiled, man, because just the thought of Terry McLaurin playing across the field with Jalen Waddle, wide receiver out of Alabama, who I have them taken at 19. I really don't. I think there's a small chance he falls to 19. Like, I don't really think this is that realistic. But whenever I was breaking it down, there were so many teams that needed edge rushers and corners and things this is just kind of how it shook out. But um, I just hope there's a competent quarterback there next year, because I think the combination of Terry McLaurin and Jalen Waddle is too much fun to pass up. And so whenever I realized that he was still kind of sitting there as I was going through things, and the need at wide receiver really for the next few teams coming up, I kind of had a possible receiver run in my head already. So this is where the receiver run kind of started.
Yeah, I think that would be a fantastic pick for them if he's there, depending on what they do with that quarterback position. But yeah, anytime you can have two guys like McLaurin and Waddle, um, basically able to take the top off of any defense, and they're guys that they can catch a 2 or 3 yard pass, and either one of those guys can be gone. And I definitely wouldn't argue with that. So number 20, we have the Chicago Bears. Have them selecting the guy that you had Miami taken, Jeremiah Owusu Koromoa, Notre Dame linebacker. We kind of touched on him. I just think, with a chance to pair him with, oh my gosh, why am I blanking? Who's a linebacker that they have there? Um, really good linebacker from Chicago. Let's see if you let me look it up real quick here because my mind's going blank. We've hit on so many players that it's I'm blanking real quick here. Let me see
I
here.
mean, I'm assuming we're not talking about Khalil Mack, right? Like we're looking at for
No,
somebody
no, no.
else.
Yeah, we're looking
Okay.
at we're looking at a guy that can
Roquan
yeah,
Smith.
Roquan.
Then okay.
So I think pairing him with Roquan Smith in that defense, with Roquan Smith, you have a guy that can attack the quarterback, can play multiple levels, and then you take a guy that can play the pass and is as rangy as the linebacker Jeremiah Owusu Koromoa. Then I just think it's such a great pairing. Obviously, we know with the wide receiver position there, the quarterback position, they really need some help on offense. But there is talk about, Allen Robinson could possibly be franchise tagged as well. We'll kind of see what happens with that. I know they really like Darnell Mooney. They still
Me
have,
too.
yeah, they still have Anthony Miller there, who hasn't quite lived up, but I do think he is still talented as well. Tight end's another position that they should really look at addressing. Um,
Maybe.
yeah,
Cole
so
Kmet showed a little bit of promise last year.
yeah,
We'll say tight ends usually take a little bit longer to develop than some other skill positions. So,
yeah, definitely. So
we'll see. But
yeah, so that's just kind of where I went with the Bears. I'll let you take your selection.
yeah, so I went with my assumption is even if Allen Robinson gets franchise tagged, I think there's a decent chance with how good of a receiver people know that he is. And the fact that it seems like him and the Bears aren't getting to a long-term deal. I think even if he gets tagged, there's a realistic chance he gets traded. And I think there's plenty of teams out there that would pay what it would take to get him on their team, via trade. So I did go with the wide receiver position. I hope that similar to with Washington, I hope the quarterback position isn't a dumpster fire because I love Rashad Bateman, and um, I don't want him to be in a bad situation similar to what Al Robinson has been in. But that's where I've got him landing right now. I love Bateman as a player. I can't say enough things to talk about how much I like this guy, just as a pure, outside, like just number one type of guy that can live out there on the outside. And I like the thought of him and Mooney. Kind of, like we were talking about with Waddle and McLaurin, I'm a big Darnell Mooney fan. Having him and Bateman, if they can just have a quarterback, I've kind of soured on Anthony Miller, but those two guys, if Cole Kmet can develop, um, I would like the weapons a lot to where they just got to figure out the quarterback, which is, always the biggest. If you don't have one, that's going to be the biggest question mark on your roster. So, but yeah, I think Allen Robinson, one way or another, ends up out of the picture. So I have Bateman sliding in there to attempt to replace the great receiver known as Allen Robinson.
Yeah, and if they pick him one pick before our next pick here, I hate Chicago.
Yeah, yeah.
As pick number 21, we have my Indianapolis Colts. Obviously, with the trade for Carson Wentz, that takes them out of the cornerback or quarterback market for this year. So there's no chance in trading up. I do think there is a very decent chance that Chris Ballard trades back here, maybe into a late first round, early second round pick, and gets more picks next year to kind of offset that Wentz trade some. But I can definitely, if they do seem, to want to stay there at 21, have them selecting offensive tackle Christian Darrisaw out of Virginia Tech, who is a great prospect. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Tyron Smith there from Dallas, as far as like his size, his strength, just an absolute bulldozer monster on the offensive tackle. And then I think if you pair him and put him next, to Quentin Nelson on that offensive line, you have two just really good, protection assets there. I believe he hasn't let up a sack now in a couple seasons. So I definitely could see them going offensive tackle here, replacing Anthony Costanzo, whose retirement became official today, and giving Carson Wentz even more protection guarantee to next year to kind of let him work from a clean pocket and see if they can develop him and get him back to his, I mean, not even 2017, but that 2018, 2019
Yeah.
level of play. Um, so that's who I have, and coincidentally, it's who you have as well.
One of my proudest moments whenever I put our mock draft side by side in the table today was I picked the same guy as the Colts super fan for the Colts picks. Like, okay, I'm something right's going on here.
Means
So
you're learning. You've been around me too long.
that was cool to see. I wanted to mock a wide receiver here to help win so bad, man, but Waddle and Bateman both came off the board for me right before this pick. If either one would have been there, it would have been really, really hard for me to resist mocking either one of those guys
Agree.
there. Um, but the next receiver up for me, who I love with Rondell Moore, I thought that the offensive tackle made more sense because even though I like Rondell more than, oh, what's the guy's name? The speedster he missed this year.
Paris Campbell.
Paris Campbell, yeah. Even though I like Rondell Moore more than Paris Campbell, I think those guys can kind of play the same type of role to an extent, to where I think Bateman and Waddle bring a little bit something extra. But I love Rondell Moore, and so it was even hard for me not to project him there, even with Paris Campbell there. Like, who cares, man?
Like,
Just
yeah,
let them
I wouldn't
run.
hate it at all. I
Like,
wouldn't hate
just
it at all.
let them run. Like it would still be fun. But
And if there's anybody that's going to get guys like that open, I mean, Frank Wright, can draw up some great plays with those guys. And I
yeah,
mean, we saw
so
that last year at the beginning, right before Paris Campbell took that hit to the knee, early on in the season. We saw Paris Campbell get wide open and get some of those looks, and he looked like he was going to be in store for a monster year. So I think if you add him and Rondell Moore can play that kind of T.Y. Hilton role as well. I
mhm.
think Rondell Moore, if it wasn't for the size issue, and I know we kind of talked about this, me and you in passing, um, I think him and Jamar Chase are right there with each other as far as talent wise. Um, I think Jamar Chase is obviously with his size that puts him at a lot better position than Rondell Moore. But I just think as
Yeah,
far as
Rondell's got
receiving
everything
skills,
else other than
yeah,
size going for him, though.
yeah,
Like I mean, he's right there with Jamar in terms of just skill. He just doesn't have the size that Jamar has, and that's a valuable asset to have at receiver. So,
definitely.
but yeah, no, I agree. But yeah, so it was cool to see us land on the same guy for the
Yeah,
Colts. I was
yeah,
proud for that.
yeah. So let's get Wentz some help. Let's let him cook. Let's get back to that level. So um, we'll move down here a little bit here on the screen, and we'll get to our next
Oh, we got
selection.
to get to the Tennessee Titans now.
Yeah. Oh man, I freaking hate talking about these guys. But I mean, we're here for it. So 22 Tennessee Titans. I have them selecting defensive end Quiddy Pay out of Michigan. I think this would be a fantastic selection for them, similar to last year, how they had a guy fall to them that we all thought was going to go much earlier in the secondary. Um, and so I think Quiddy Pay, which is another guy I can see the Colts or some of these other teams taking as well, because I know you had him way up there at number 11.
Yeah.
I'm just not quite sold on his athleticism and production as much as some of these other pass rushers. I think they have higher upsides. I think the floor of Quiddy Pay, though, is much lower. I think he can step in right away and be a really good starter for them. And Lord knows, they definitely need some pass rushing help. They, kind of struck out with the Clowney signing. Um,
Yeah.
and I believe they also signed a guy that played for the Rams the season before. Who was the other defensive end there?
I don't know if they signed a guy from the Rams unless I'm forgetting somebody.
Uh, let me
While you're
look
looking
it
at
up.
that though, I've
Yeah,
also
yeah. Go
got
ahead and do your pick while I'm looking this up.
I've got an edge rusher as well. And like coming into this mock draft, whenever I was thinking about the Titans, I didn't know who it was going to end up being, but I knew that it was going to be a pass rusher whenever I got to this pick. So I already had, um, let's see, I already had Quiddy Pay and Gregory Russo off the board at this point. So for me, the next man up as far as edge rushers goes was Azeez Ojulari from Georgia. And, I like this guy actually during the college season, I did watching a decent amount of just watching Georgia, watching the SEC, and it just his speed, man.
Very
He
fast guy.
always jumped off the screen whenever you were watching those guys coming off the edge. So, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see this. This could be a guy that I could see possibly jump up for me as I start to watch more stuff and things like that. Just the excitement he brings as a
And,
pass
and
rusher.
especially at the combine, I think that's a guy that could possibly kill the combine as well.
Yeah,
So the guy I
I
was thinking
guess
of, it wasn't.
technically pro days this year, but
Yeah, yeah. So the guy I was thinking of wasn't the Rams. It was Harold Landry.
oh, okay,
That they
yeah,
had. So yeah, I think between Clowney and Harold Landry, they both kind of struck out there as well. And then obviously there's another team that could use an offensive tackle. Losing Conklin to the Browns, and then
right,
what happened with their first round pick. Obviously, that's just a kind of another disaster for that team as well. Because
sure.
I know he tweeted out tonight that he's pretty much done playing for the
It is
Titans,
so
and
weird.
then he deleted it. I think his agent kind of got to him, but
Yeah,
I don't think there's any way you're going to see him back. So that's another team that could use an offensive lineman as well there.
right.
So now we'll move on to the New York Jets. I have them selecting. Finally, have a running back coming off the board here. I have them selecting Najee Harris, running back out of Alabama, to join. Um, I believe I had Justin Fields there, so I think Justin Fields, Najee Harris is a really good running back. He's not my favorite running back in the class, but I do think that as of right now, teams are viewing him as the running back one. So, you know, obviously with Alabama running backs, it's very hit or miss. You never know what you're going to get with those guys because they do play behind such a dominant offensive line. You might have Derrick Henry, you might have Trent Richardson, but I kind of think he might fall somewhere in the middle there. I don't think he's going to be as great as Derrick Henry has
I do
been, but
think he'll be better than Derrick Henry in the passing game, though, for
yeah,
sure.
definitely. He's definitely a guy that can work in the passing game. Um, but I just think the opportunity to pair him, and that's a huge position of need for them as well. They definitely need a running back on that roster.
Yeah,
So
they
I
do.
think it's just a really good marriage there.
Yeah, the only reason I disagree with that pick is I think, I mean, obviously we both have him addressing quarterback already, but quarterback and offensive line are both, much more important to making the running game work, I think, than the running back itself. I mean, having talent at the running back position is important, but I think before they address the running back position, they still have even they have some okay pieces on the offensive line, one more than okay piece, but I think that they still have a little bit more work to do on the offensive line before they need to address running back at this point. But I mean, I'll say all that to say that I have them taking a skill position guy as well with Rondell Moore, the wide receiver out of Purdue. Rather it's Sam Darnold or a rookie. I mean, Jamison Crowder is expected to be cut. And if you want your rookie quarterback or if you want Sam Darnold to succeed, I don't think you can go into the season with Denzel Mims, who I did like, but I don't think you can go into the season with Denzel Mims and Rashad Perriman and expect to get the best out of your quarterback. So I think adding a guy that can change the game so much every single time he touches the ball with Rondell Moore, it's hard to get the stink of the Jets out of your mind. But if you can take Adam Gase out of the picture, if you can project some kind of hope on the Jets, it's a little bit more exciting to see a guy that I like in Rondell Moore a lot land at a place like that where he could see some immediate work and make a difference in the offense. So I've got him taking a skill position guy as well, just different position, different player.
Gotcha. So we'll move on here to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Um, I have them. Obviously, they're going to be in the quarterback market as well. Depending on what happens, I can see them moving up, possibly getting somebody. Depending on what happens with Ben this year, and maybe they get a guy that can develop behind Ben. I know there's been some talk about Mac Jones.
Oh my God, I made a
Uh,
typo earlier. So
yeah,
I didn't
yeah.
mean to
So I
cut
was
you
gonna, I
off,
was
but
gonna, I was gonna clear that for
I
you.
put the wrong player or I put the wrong team with your pick. So
Yeah.
I'll
So
let you clear that up.
yeah, so I have them selecting a running back here. Obviously, since Le'Veon Bell left that position, James Conner can't stay healthy, and he's really kind of fallen off the last year or so. And then outside of him, that position's pretty bare there. Um, Obviously, they've got wide receivers. They've got a really strong defense, pretty decent offensive line. You think get past the quarterback help if they do decide to get Ben back. I think getting him my favorite running back in the draft, which is surprising some people, is Javonte Williams out of North Carolina.
Not
Um,
Alabama as
yeah, not
my as
Alabama.
the
He's got
sheet
it
I
as
typed
Alabama
up
here, but it is
say.
North Carolina. He played for the Tar Heels.
Yes.
Guy's just an unbelievable prospect there at that position. Size, speed, basically anything you would need. His ability to break tackles is the best by far in this class, I think. He had 150 something touches. Guy broke 75 tackles last year, which is just like that's insane. So he's my favorite running back prospect in this draft. I think if you pair him with that offensive line, with those weapons, obviously Pittsburgh has always been known to have really good running backs. I think that's just a very good position there for them to take. So I'll go ahead and let you take yours.
Yeah, so I mean, we're not too far off. Javonte Williams is my third favorite running back in this class, so we're not all that far off in terms of where we how we feel on the player. For me, I ended up actually going defense. I went with the edge rusher Jalen Phillips out of Miami. This one was kind of tough because I mean, Pouncey retired, but centers don't usually go this early in the draft. It's a position they can address later. They're not going to replace Big Ben here, so it's the next replacement piece I looked at was I don't expect them to be able to retain Bud Dupree in free agency, which opens up uh, some needs there for an edge rusher, and I think Jalen Phillips can fill that, assuming J.J. Watt doesn't go join his brother in Pittsburgh. I do think that offensive line can make sense as well. If you're not going center and you want to go a different position, their offensive line is aging, so if there's a tackle or something like that that's still on the board here, or in my case, Elijah Vera Tucker is still here. Somebody like that makes sense to me too, but. Um, I think the defense is going to have to continue to win these guys games as long as Big Ben is there. So I think they need to just keep stacking that while they can. And so I landed on Jalen Phillips, the edge out of Miami.
Yeah, anytime you can add to that defensive line and those pass rushers, especially with Bud Dupree's free agency, I think that's a really great landed spot for them. So now we have Jacksonville at pick number 25, uh, their second first round pick. I have them taking the best defensive tackle in this class, which it's not a very strong defensive tackle class this year. So I can see this guy definitely going up further. Um, but I have them selecting Christian Barmore out of Alabama. Kind of had a down year, but I think in the college football playoffs, he definitely kind of shined in those few games there for them. And Jacksonville, like we said earlier, they need help pretty much anywhere they can get it. They're in a position they can just take best player available, kind of build that roster around Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, I went on the defensive side of the ball as well, but I went back to the secondary. Um, I mean they've got their franchise quarterback locked up, number one overall now, and so it's kind of tough to gauge where they're going to go with the 25th pick because, like we touched on earlier, they've got $80 million to spend in a free agency period that's going to happen prior to the draft. So there's a number of holes on the defensive side of the roster to fill, and I do think some of those do get filled in free agency. So it'll be a little bit easier, I think, to project this pick afterwards. But right now, I got to take in safety Trayvon Moore. We got a TCU. For me with the secondary, we talked about holes already for the defense, and the secondary has plenty, in its own right. And I mean, I think he's the best safety in the class. He's got the size to match up. He's got the prototypical safety size, and he's led all college safeties in pass breakups the past 2 seasons. So for me, this one with him still being on the board, them having a need, and him being such a great player that's still sitting there, this one was for now easier for me to fill in, but it could get more complicated depending on what they do in free agency.
Gotcha. All right. So pick number 26, we have the Cleveland Browns. Weird seeing them so far down the draft board. I've been used to them selecting
This
top
is
five
weird.
picks for years now. So I actually have them selecting Trayvon Morig, the guy that you just had Jacksonville take. Um, his game is very similar to me to Jamal Adams. And I think if you can add that type of a presence on that defense, especially in that secondary. Uh, I think that can just take Cleveland, the
Yeah, and
defense, I think,
honestly, I
to
think
another
he might be
level.
better in the pass game than Jamal Adams is, to be complete.
Yeah,
Like, what? Not maybe not at this point, but like coming out into the draft,
right.
I think he might be better in the pass game than Jamal Adams even. So maybe not as successful in the run game and being used as a gadget guy to rush the passer and stuff too. But I think a lot of them, and just as a safety that can cover the pass too. So I don't know. We'll see.
Gotcha. All right. So go ahead with your pick for Cleveland.
Yeah, so I got linebacker Zayvon Collins from Tulsa, who you actually mocked, I believe, to 18 to Miami. So not a huge difference, but a little bit of difference here on this one. So um, for me, I mean, the offensive line is straight, running backs are good, pass catchers are all good enough to where, regardless of where they go, I think it should be a lock that the Browns go defense here. Once you get past Myles Garrett and Denzel Ward, it's kind of tough to get excited about much on the defensive side of the ball for Cleveland. So just looking at who was left available and wanting to go somewhere different other than corner with them having Denzel Ward, I ended up landing on Zayvon Collins.
Yeah, definitely not a bad pick for them at all. I do think he's much more of a pass rushing type linebacker than he is kind of a player that's going to play in that backfield
Yeah, and
there.
if they end up being the JJ Watt suitor like some people think they would be, I do think I would go a different direction probably with this pick. But assuming no JJ Watt, I think this would be kind of fun, with Myles
Definitely.
Garrett and these guys. So that was my thinking there, was kind of thinking that JJ Watt didn't end up in Cleveland.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens with that. Obviously, like we said, this is pre-free agency. So now we'll move on to 27. We have the Baltimore Ravens. I have them finally getting Lamar Jackson, a dynamic wide receiver outside of Hollywood Brown, to maybe open up that passing game a little more and give him some help. I have them selecting Rondell Moore, who's one of my favorite wide receivers in this draft class out of Purdue. Just an absolute monster at that position. Obviously, he opted out this last year. We didn't get to see him play, but the games that he did play the year before, I mean, guy's just a game breaker. And I think if you pair him with that running game with Marquise Brown, um, obviously with Lamar Jackson, we know what he can do. I think the skies that just opens up a whole nother dimension for that offense once again.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I like it, man. Rondell Moore, like I said earlier, echoing your statements, he's one of my most favorite players to just watch play regardless of position. So I would like to see a guy like you. I mean, Bateman, you had Bateman going, 10 picks earlier in your mind, but if he somehow fell down to him, with them having Hollywood stretching the field and things like that, I would like to see a guy like that fall to him. Um, but you can't go wrong with Rondell Moore. So for me, I had offensive lineman Elijah Vera Tucker from USC, who I believe you already had off the board at this point. I mean, assuming all goes well with Ronnie Stanley coming back from his injury, yeah, I don't think it can hurt with as much as this team runs the ball to add another offensive line piece who I'm pretty sure he played tackle mostly in college, but from what I've read, he projects more to play on the interior.
Yeah.
And I think he could fill, either interior side for the Ravens, but he at least has that flexibility to where you can kind of move him around if you need to. And they've got some moving pieces on the offensive line from what I've seen and read, this offseason. So I think as dependent as they are on the run and things like that, if somehow Elijah Vera Tucker does fall to this point, I think that I would like this landing spot quite a bit.
Yeah, I do. If he falls there, I think that would be a steal for them. I have him going much earlier. I think 16 to Arizona, so
Right.
that's
Yep.
quite a big of a drop there for him. For where I think he should be, but definitely can't go wrong there. So 28, we'll kind of get into our last five picks and wrap this one up. We have New Orleans. This was the toughest pick for me because
Me
the
too. I
roster
agree.
is so well built outside of the quarterback position. Obviously, we'll see what happens with Jameis and if he's going to return there. I think there's a strong chance that does happen. But there has been some talk, of Andrus Pete possibly being a cap casualty because they are so far deep into the cap,
Hmm.
possibly trading him or having to cut him with that contract outright, and absorb some stuff. So if that does happen, I have them selecting his replacement. That's offensive tackle Samuel Cosme out of Texas. There's a few, you know, tackles that I think are better, as far as talent wise, but I think as far as fit wise on what that offense wants to do, um, I think he might be the best fit at that spot. So, you know, this is just a really tough one for me because there's not many holes there. This is going to be a spot that for sure is going to change for me after free agency and once these cap casualties hit, where we're able to tell a little bit more about team holes. This is going to be one that I can definitely see changing soon.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we took the same route to get to our pick, but we just went different sides of the ball. But I mean, basically for me, like you said, they're strapped for cash. They're like, I think the deepest team in terms of, how far they have to climb out of the cap. And there's going to be some guys that normally wouldn't hit free agency that are going to get cut. And one of the guys that I read that could be the case is Sheldon Rankins as a possible cap casualty. And so I ended up going with Christian Barmore from Alabama, who I think he should probably be off the board by now, but it worked out for me that he wasn't. And, reading about Sheldon Rankins and seeing that, and then seeing Barmore still on the board, for now, that was kind of easy for me to piece in, but there's still going to be a lot of moving pieces with the Saints to where it's going to be, it'll be a little bit easier, I think, closer to draft time. But right now, it's kind of a guessing game of who's going to get cut, who's not going to get cut, and what positions they need to fill. So this is just kind of us making our best guess.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely agree. I think if Barmore's on the board there, they're probably running that card up there.
Right.
So let's see. Now 29, we have the Green Bay Packers, uh, who, that's another roster. I think they can go either side of the ball,
Mhm.
and it won't hurt them. But I have them selecting cornerback Asante Samuel Jr. out of FSU. I think he is, to me, he's the smoothest kind of cornerback in this draft. Has a very smooth game. Definitely not afraid to attack that position. And we kind of saw how important that position is there in Green Bay because we saw Kevin King basically lose them a playoff game almost
Yeah.
single-handedly. And so I don't think there's any way they go into next year. Obviously, they fired the defensive coordinator. Um, they can possibly go pass rusher here as well. There's some talk about Preston Smith getting cut because of the cap and stuff like that. So I can see them addressing that position as well. So, but as of right now, I have Asante Samuel Jr. kind of helping solidify that cornerback position there, and maybe having a better result than this last postseason game.
Yeah, I mean, outside of Jair Alexander, who is, at worst, I think a top three cornerback in the league. They've got to get the rest of that secondary, not the rest of it. They've got some okay pieces, but the other cornerback on the side of him, they got to get that figured out. So if I wouldn't have went the direction I went, I would have went the same direction as you. But I ended up going the other side of the ball. I just think with all the noise that Green Bay heard whenever they decided to go quarterback, running back, first and second round last year, with the clear need at wide receiver and a clearly, historically deep wide receiver class, they decided to pass that up for a quarterback and a running back whenever you already had Aaron Rodgers and Aaron Jones on your roster. That brought a social media buzz that was,
Yeah, they
was
yeah they got shit on pretty hard, rightfully
unrivaled.
so.
Yeah. So I think it was impossible for them not to hear that. And just the remarks that Rodgers even made after the draft, that I think that they finally do address the wide receiver position in another, these last 2 years, man, at the wide receiver position in this draft has been so much fun. And, so that's the direction that I do have them going here with wide receiver Kadarius Toney from Florida. Um, just getting this guy the ball, man, and just letting him see what he can make happen. It's so much fun to see. And if you mix his explosion, um, with Aaron Rodgers just straight out ability, and you got Devontae Adams already taking attention off of you. The dude broke 32 tackles on 80 catches. So I mean, he put the ball in his hands. He's going to make some things happen. And then you've got Matt LaFleur has looked like he can hold his own in terms of getting guys open and making plays happen and things like that. Obviously, we don't know how much of that is Aaron Rodgers. We assume a lot of it is Aaron Rodgers because of how great he is. But nevertheless, Aaron's still there. So I think getting him another weapon, which at this point with I'm really sure on who like the top 5 receivers I like are, in terms of Jamar Chase, Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle, Rashad Bateman, Rondell Moore. Like I know those are my 5 favorite. There's a couple guys I still go back and forth on for once we get to 6, but so far this is the kind of the guy that I've landed on. So it was tough for me not to plug him in here for Green Bay. So I just went ahead and put in Kadarius Toney from Florida.
Yeah, I can. I think that would be a fantastic pick for them. Um, like you said, though, this is such a deep wide receiver class that I think they can get a guy in the second or third round that can be just as big of a game breaker in that offense. And the cornerback position does kind of fall off a little bit after the next couple guys. So it's one of those things that I think if they're going to shore it up, they need to shore it up early. I mean, obviously we know what happens with cornerbacks drafted in the first round. They have a much higher hit rate as opposed to some of these. I mean, obviously you're going to have your outliers like your Shermans or some of these other guys that can produce
Mm-hmm.
cornerbacks. But I think, that's a position that goes relatively quickly in the draft because of how important it is in today's NFL. So yeah, I can't argue there with any of that. So number 30, we have Buffalo Bills, and we have the same guy here for them. I think it's probably the biggest need on this roster. And I know you're itching to talk about this and what a landing spot it would be for you. So I have running back Travis Etienne from Clemson as well, as you have them. So you're kind of rubbing your hands together, ready to talk. So take it
Yeah,
away.
man. Yeah.
Take it
I
away.
mean, like, I don't like spending earlier first round picks on running backs, but this situation right here where teams are late in the first round, they don't have a huge glaring hole. Now, I do think that there are a couple places on the defensive side of the ball Buffalo could address here if they wanted to. Um, but for me, it was just too much fun to pass up the opportunity to not mock Travis Etienne to Buffalo here. It's just, this is my running back one in this year's running back class. I've got a 2-year running man crush on Travis Etienne, where I mean last year he was my running back one before he decided to go back into the draft or into the college and play his senior season. So just getting the opportunity to put him in this situation, it was tough. And I mean, look, last year with Kansas City and Clyde Edwards-Helaire, it didn't work out as well his rookie season. I do think Clyde is in for a better season this year. But I mean, Clyde was my 5th favorite running back last year, and he ended up being the first one taken. So it's a little bit different level of excitement with this scenario where it's my number 1 running back going to
Right.
such a great position. And I mean,
Yeah, you know
look,
who my number one running back was?
yeah, yeah. So Travis Etienne, he didn't have his greatest just pure rushing season this year. He had that last year, but then this year, the question marks that he had surrounding his receiving game, he answered those with the most receiving yards of any running back in college football, and according to Pro Football Focus, the highest receiving grade of any running back in college football. So the big playability has never been in doubt. He's had up and down rushing, but he has shown that he can get it done. And now he's showing the 3-down skill set that it's, I mean, it's well known between me and you. I've got the number 1 pick in our dynasty league. That's a single quarterback league. So clearly it's going to come down to where does Najee Harris land? Where does Travis Etienne land? And man, there's not very many spots I would be more excited about for either guy than right here for Buffalo. This is the only running back I have going in round 1. This is, I've got Travis Etienne, Najee Harris, and then
Javante Williams.
Javonte Williams. That's my top 3. But this is Travis Etienne's the only guy I've got going first round, and I would be ecstatic if this ended up coming to life here. If we could mock this into reality, that would be fantastic. But yeah, this was one that I've kind of had penciled in for a little while now, is what I hope happens.
Gotcha. All right, man. Well, so now we have Kansas City, and I think with both these picks, we do differ on these, but I think we kind of got there the same way, just a little bit different paths.
Okay.
So obviously, I have uh, well, let's preface this with this. So I have them selecting edge Jalen Phillips in Miami. I think you had him going to Pittsburgh at 24.
Mhm.
I think they get another pass rusher there to kind of pair, because I think right now Chris Jones is probably their only main big source of pass rushing, and they kind of saw firsthand what pass rush can do. Um, they got a front row seat to that in the Super Bowl,
Yeah.
and which is why I think you also selected your pick because of pass rush.
Yeah.
But I think they're much more likely to try to mimic that as opposed to protect against it. Um, because right now, outside of Chris Jones, they've got a couple prospects there that aren't bad. But I think just anytime you can add a guy like Jalen Phillips that can attack off the edge, um, I think it would be a slam dunk pick for them, and they'd be lucky if he fell that far.
Yeah, and Frank Clark can kind of disappear at times. I am thinking of the right guy, right? I'm not mistaken in
Yeah,
saying Frank Clark.
yeah.
Okay, so I wanted to make sure I didn't want to make
Yeah,
a
because I had
mistake on
D
that.
Ford and they traded him, but then they traded
Right.
Frank back
Yeah.
in. So
Yeah. And I really thought Frank Clark would kind of make more of an impact than he has up to this point, especially with somebody as dominant as Chris Jones, taking some of that attention away. Um, so I mean, if I wouldn't have went the direction I went, I would have went the same direction as you. Different player with Jalen Phillips already being off the board for me, but I think some of this might be prisoner of the moment from watching the Super Bowl and
yeah,
just seeing that offensive line get decimated and thinking, man, like they have got to protect Patrick Mahomes, but that I could not get that thought out of my mind, and so I did end up going with the office with some offensive line help with Wyatt Davis out of Ohio State. I mean, from what I read, he's only allowed 4 sacks and hits combined over the past 2 seasons. Apparently, his 2019 was better than his 2018. But from what I could see, I think that this would be a solid pick for them if they did decide to try to prevent pass rush versus trying to add to theirs, which is the direction that I ended up going on this one.
yeah, definitely. Like I said, two different scenarios, but I think we got there from the same way. So,
Right?
um,
Yeah.
so now we'll end it here with pick number 32, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I think this is another prime pick that they could trade out of, maybe have another team pull up there in the first. But if not, I have them selecting cornerback Afietu Melifonwu out of Syracuse. Just a very rangy guy. I think pairs well in that secondary. Just kind of keeps solidifying what they already have there. Um, with that secondary, I think he can kind of take that defense once again to another level, similar to what Vita Vea did when he came back.
Mhm.
I think the guy has the makings of a fantastic nickel cornerback. Very, very talented guy, very fast guy from what I understand, and he's definitely a guy too that if they don't want to play in the nickel, very lengthy guy. I believe he's like right around like 6'3", so extremely lengthy guy. Very young, um, just very prototypical type cornerback they can throw on the outside there as well. Obviously, they have Antoine Winfield in the backfield. Their other cornerback who had a fantastic season this year. Can't think of him off the top of my head. Um, but I think he's just another guy that they can mold and keep that defense locked in for Tom Brady.
Right. Yeah. And so, I mean, for me, what it really came down to was just reading the tea leaves of all indications are is that they plan on bringing back most, if not all, of their free agent pieces on defense, and that they also plan on either getting Chris Godwin back long term or franchise tagging him if they're not able to do that. Antonio Brown has serious interest to come back to this team, and if all this wants to come to fruition, I think they're going to have to make some cuts possibly on the offensive line side of the ball. So I went with the offensive tackle from Texas that you projected to go to New Orleans a few picks earlier. So for me, it just came down to, I mean, you've got the pieces on defense. Clearly, I do agree they could use secondary help though, but that you've got good pieces on defense, you've got playmakers, you've got the GOAT at quarterback. So just keep investing on protecting the GOAT, while he's there is what it came down to for me, really, at this point, whenever I was looking at it. So that wrapped up my first ever full first round mock draft.
Yeah, and we made it, man. Like, this was a long episode. We knew it would be because of how many picks. I mean, anytime you have to touch on 32 teams, it's going to make for a long show. But I mean, really excited. Glad we were able to kind of get that done with you and everything. And this is something we will definitely revisit. This is, like I said, this is our first one very early in the process. We'll revisit it kind of once free agency hits. We're able to see the kind of team needs once some of these cuts happen. Um, and we'll see kind of where we land before the official draft happens. Uh, but yeah, man, like, super fun. I love doing mock drafts. It's something that I've enjoyed the last few years now, and it's excited to kind of bring you into that fold now as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I do want to, real quick, a few shout outs. One shout out to you. I've had a lot of conversations with you in terms of NFL draft and things like that that has helped me kind of get myself into this. And then also, shout out to Pro Football Focus, to Bleacher Report, Sports Illustrated, CBS Sports, Walter Football, Pro Football Network, Daniel Jeremiah over at NFL.com. I mean, there's over the last couple of months, there's been a lot of stuff I've been reading where a lot of things that helped me form my opinions came from those guys. And
Yeah,
so,
and another one to add on to
I mean,
that. Another one to add on to that's the Draft Network, which is one of my favorite sites to use as well.
yeah, yeah,
Draft Network's a fantastic
they
site.
got a cool little mock draft machine over there.
Yeah, they definitely do. It's a fantastic tool if you are interested in doing some of this stuff like we are. Um, I'm not really that huge on Walter football. I kind of think it is what it is there, but they are a
Yeah,
good resource.
yeah. I read some of their stuff though, so I didn't
Yeah,
want to leave them out.
right.
They got some clicks out of me. So,
Yeah, yeah. That's what they're there for. They're there for those clicks.
right, right.
But yeah, it's definitely an in-depth process, and you definitely learn a lot more. And this is something that actually, believe it or not, helps me in fantasy football, is doing these. And like I said, I watch a lot of film, I scout a lot of players, and you find your guys that you like a few years ago, with Terry McLaurin. You know, I really liked Terry McLaurin in the draft. He ended up falling to Washington. There was talks about him performing at camp. I ended up getting him in, I believe, the third round of
Yeah, so
our
they're
dynasty
hmm
draft, and obviously we kind of see what he became. So yeah, I mean, you're able to look at a lot of players, especially at the skill position level. You're able to get familiar with these guys, and then when you see the situation, if it's a guy you were high on and he goes to a certain situation, whether he's well known or not, it does help you in fantasy football quite a bit. Um,
Yeah, I mean, last year, Antonio Gibson was a guy that I was really high on, and I was able to get him behind guys like Keyshawn Vaughn and Zach Moss were a couple running backs that went ahead of him. And I was able to grab him in the second round. Guys like I mean, you're right, man. Being able to, it's fun to zero in on guys and pick your guys regardless. Like you're not gonna hit every single one of them.
no,
Whenever
trust me.
you do hit on them though, because I mean, I didn't hit on Laquan Treadwell, so clearly they're all not going to work out. And I didn't hit. Oh, what was the wide receiver from TCU that I like so much? Oh, what was his name?
Jalen Rager.
No, 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 no. Way back several years before that. I did like Jalen Rager, but back several years before that. Um, damn. I'm gonna
Just
have
look
to
it
figure
up.
that out because that's gonna bug me. But the point is like I talked about how I hit on Antonio Gibson in our dynasty league last year. Um, you're not gonna hit on all of them, but it's just it's more it's fun, man, to have your guys and to kind of put your stamp your name next to these guys.
Oh, Josh Doctson.
Josh Doxson. I love Josh Doxson, man. Him and Laquan Treadwell is two guys that, like, whenever I think about guys that I love that I missed out on, those are two that just immediately come to
Oh,
mind.
well, if you
Um,
if you do this long enough, like I said, I've done this now for about 4 or 5 years. If you do this long enough, I have a laundry list of guys that I love that have just been absolutely,
Yeah, yeah. So
absolutely fucking
for
donkey.
me, I don't have as many on the defensive side of the ball because for a long, I mean, I've looked at fantasy relevant guys in the draft for a while now, just because I've even before I got into dynasty, like I said earlier, fantasy was my interest, so I like to do my homework on that end. So it's fun to kind of get to put a little bit more of a stamp on the defensive side too, and just be more whole in the in the entire aspect of it. But it's
Well,
still definitely for me, it's still definitely going to be more fantasy push than anything. Like I'm still, without a doubt, I'm most excited to watch the first 3-4 rounds of the NFL draft, see where these guys go, and really get to talk fantasy. That's where my heart's at. That's whenever we go through this process, that's what I'm most passionate about. So it was fun to do this exercise. I look forward to doing it again after free agency, but my heart still lies with fantasy, man. So that's what I'm most excited about, without a doubt.
definitely, man. Well, we'll go ahead and end this. That way we won't keep everybody up too late. So, once again, thanks everybody for listening. Just make sure that you review, leave us questions, leave a review, like us, subscribe. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. And then, like we always say, if you would like to get on a show with us, just contact us. We definitely love to make that happen somehow. Also,
Yeah.
just, once again, big shout out Carson Wentz. Big shout out.
You can't shout out
That's
Carson
all I've
Wentz
been
without
doing.
shouting
I've
out
actually kind
Matthew
of taken,
Stafford.
yeah,
So
like I've taken time away from watching some of these draft prospects, and I've just been like deep diving. Like I literally think at this point, like the last few days, and my fiance is probably tired of it. To be honest, I think I've watched every snap Carson Wentz has ever taken in like the last like 4 years. It's been like borderline obsessive. So
Yeah. I mean, like Lana said, go to YouTube, get in the comment section. You guys are able to see our ugly faces talk about football. If you go watch it on the YouTube, be sure to go to subscribe, like the video if you like this video, and be sure to hit the little bell whenever you subscribe so you can get notified whenever we do get new uploads. And get in the comments and tell us why we don't know what the hell we're talking about, and why your favorite team, there's no shot your favorite team picks who we said they're going to pick. Let us know from your fan standpoint where you think your team's going. So that's what I'm always, that's the thing that intrigues me most about draft time, is I want to hear from like diehard fans from other teams of who they think that their team is targeting. That's I always like to hear that perspective. So
yeah,
that's what I
for
want to
sure,
see in
man.
the comments, without a doubt.
Yeah, for sure. So we'll go ahead and end it there. Thank you guys so much for listening with us, and we will be back next week with another brand new episode. Hope everybody has a wonderful evening. Stay safe. Thank you.